Hello, people. I'd like to share a story with you, a UFO story, which has happened to myself and my brother around 40 years ago. So it was a long time ago, but the relevance of it has not changed. Um, Briefly, my brother and I witnessed a chase between two hostile craft. Um, the chase resulted in one of those craft crashing into a tree, and a third party was involved. That third party was able to get a close-up look at the craft. It measured around 8 meters long and appeared like a yellow speedboat shape from the underneath. So it was a very compelling sighting, which is why I'm here today on the internet talking about it, because I can talk about it with a certain level of confidence that not all witnesses have. Um, another reason why I've decided to start bringing this out to the public awareness is there is a level we do need to step up the level of conversation. Most of our public is still stuck in the believe it or not stage. And from my own experience, this needs to move forward. The US Navy has recently come out and acknowledged the existence of UFOs within our atmosphere. Their fighter pilots are involved in pursuing these UFOs. So this has added a certain level of legitimacy to people like myself to come out and talk about it. Um, I suppose I'll go into some detail about what my brother and I witnessed. We were quite young at the time, but if you haven't heard this story or read the story, then it's probably worth me describing it to you. Our house looked over a valley up towards the township of Stirling. At the end of the valley, there was a ridge with some pine trees on it, and we knew the valley well. We'd hear cars and helicopters and any other mechanical devices. The sound seemed to echo down the valley. Well, on this particular night, my brother called out and said, "Phil, come and check this out." At the end of the valley, just above the tree line, was a yellow object. It was hovering, wobbling around, then it would resume its hover. And we knew that this was not any ordinary craft, so we were pretty interested. Um, a few minutes later, a red object joined this yellow object, and it was almost had a cartoon-like quality to it. The red object zoomed up to the yellow object, reversed up, and then zoomed up again, as if the yellow occupants had not actually noticed the presence of it. The yellow object took off as fast as a rocket, and the red object followed. So these craft zigzagged across our valley back and forth many times in very close pursuit, sort of like a couple of blowflies. If you've ever watched a couple of blowflies zipping around the sky, they almost operate as if they're on the same brain because they stay such a close uniform distance apart. Um, it's quite impressive to watch, and these craft performed like that. Every now and again, the yellow object became stuck as if it was caught by some invisible force, and it would shake back and forth, and then it would free itself, and the chase would continue. The sort of movements of these craft were nothing like any conventional aircraft could do. The accelerations were instant, so they'd be from a stationary position, get to a speed instantly, and stop, turn, reverse with no change in velocity at all. So it was like watching ping pong balls bounce off of a wall. Um, they'd obviously overcome the barriers of inertia. There appeared to be no inertia to the movements of these craft. We had enough time to run into our parents' room and try to get them out of bed to come and watch this, but they told us to go back to sleep, so they perhaps didn't believe us. Uh, Eventually, the yellow craft had enough of this chase and took off to our right and disappeared behind the hill. That was the end of the event. We didn't see any more chasing, and we didn't see any more craft. We waited probably for an hour afterwards to see if they'd reappear, but they didn't. All up, the sighting lasted maybe 15 minutes in total. Now, 2 days later, in the paper, another chap had reported on the same night at the same time, hearing a loud crash. He ran out the back of his house, shone the torch into a tree, and saw this yellow object wedged some 30 or 40 metres into the upper branches of this tree. He described it as an 8-metre long yellow speedboat shape from the underside. Now, the craft had knocked off a branch measuring some 30 centimetres in diameter, and had done significant damage to the tree. So it had a pretty significant impact, but it wasn't destroyed. Daryl, the chap who had witnessed this, called the police, and they did turn up. But by the time they turned up, the craft had disappeared. But from my brother's perspective and my own perspective, we knew Daryl was telling the truth because we had witnessed the same event on the same night at the same time. And where the craft had disappeared to, from our own vision, was where Daryl lived, which was behind that hill. So we knew that the two events, or the two sightings, were the same event. So I guess my reason for bringing this out to public is that I'm hoping to bring the conversation, to move the conversation forward beyond the believe it or not stage. Most of the public still seem unconvinced that we are actually being visited. And from my own perspective, there is no question. These craft were so far beyond the human inventory, especially during the 1980s, when I think the first handheld calculator only came out in 1972 into Australia. So we were still pretty primitive as far as electronic technology went. And these craft performed like nothing that the human inventory had in its possession. So it leaves very little other explanations except to say that these intelligences behind these craft were non-human and likely extraterrestrial. So the question is, or the questions which I would like the conversation to pursue is, what are they doing here? You know, these are important questions. Are they here to help us, or are they here to protect their own interest in the planet? This is the level of conversation that we need to get to, and we need to move beyond the believe it or not stage. So this is my reason for posting this YouTube video. There's no payment involved here. There's no reward. I assure you that I've tested, I guess, my openness on my friends and family, and generally ridicule is about as good as it gets. So there's not a lot of personal benefits to doing this. But I believe that the conversation is very important. The fact that my brother and I witnessed conflict tells us an enormous amount about the makeup of the visitors who are doing stuff on Earth. If there's conflict that still exists within these extraterrestrial groups, then it's likely that self-interest also exists. And this is sort of probably one of the most important parts of the conversation, is that a lot of the conversation seems to be, or a lot of witnesses seem to think that they're here to help us. Well, it may be that these entities are more benevolent than the human race. After all, we're pretty well like Planet of the Apes. We're a bunch of warring tribes. So there's no credits to the human species at all. But whether they're here to help us or protect their own interest is really the big question. And I suppose that's probably where I'd like to leave it for today. I'd hope that you guys consider, from your own experiences, what sort of evidence that you've witnessed personally that will add to this story. And I encourage you guys to post it, to bring it out, so that we can begin a conversation, because our governments are not. Our institutions are letting us down. They've been in denial as much as most of the general public. So thanks for listening, and I hope I'll speak to you again.